Mark Hurley thought back on his life as he sat alone in the dark. He thought he had it all, a great job, a nice house, and a loving wife. Now, he only had the first two. He remembered his nearly 5-year marriage. Mark and Allison were married for 7 years. They met at Marcus Financial Group, where Allison started in admin support before becoming executive assistant to Jake Marcus, who was then the boss. 7 months ago, Jake's grandfather founded the company, which is now led by his father, Alan. Alan brought Jake into the business after college to learn the ropes, and Jake quickly became regional manager. Although destined to be CEO, Jake's promotion was years away. Mark respected Alan, who helped him transition to civilian life after being wounded in the Middle East. They met during Mark's physical therapy. Mark's physical therapy when Alan saw potential in him and offered him a job on the spot. Mark had just finished his business degree before deploying and accepted. He started working 8 years ago and completed therapy, earned an MBA, and fell for Allison when she joined the company. They dated, fell in love, and got married, with Alan generously paying for their honeymoon in Hawaii 3 years later. Jake joined the company, but, unlike his father, he was arrogant and alienated his colleagues. Alan confided in Mark about his concerns regarding Jake's behavior is a bit of a concern. "I'll have to make him the regional manager eventually." "Mark," Alan said, "I know I'm counting on you to lead by example and help Jake transition into the job. Do you think you can do that?" Alan asked. "I think so, but it won't be easy." Mark replied, "What?" "Mark, I need your honest opinion of him. No sugarcoating. Alan says he's too arrogant and doesn't listen to others. He spends too much time flirting and throwing his name around. Allison says he's a carnal maltreatment lawsuit waiting to happen." Mark said Alan shook his head. "I was worried that his mother spoiled him. I hoped the job would help him mature. I'll talk to him. When is Bill retiring?" Mark asked Bill Collins, the current regional manager, if he was planning to retire. Bill said he was planning to retire in the next 6 months and had bought a place in North Idaho for retirement. Alan explained that Alan had left promising to stay in touch. Mark knew he would. There were other things Mark noticed about Jake but didn't tell Alan. Bill retired a few months later and Jake took over. Jake made some good changes, but also micromanaged and moved people around too much. 7 months ago, Jake came to Mark's office and said, "I've been thinking about hiring a new EA, and I think Allison would fit nicely." Mark replied, "Have you talked to Allison?" Jake said, "Not yet. I wanted your input first. What does she like at home?" Mark said, "Allison and I are happily married, and she's a professional. If you think she's qualified, offer her the job. It's her. I know it's a big decision, but remember she's married to me. I get it. If she takes the job, it might mean travel." "Are you okay with that?" Jake asked. "I trust my wife. If she accepts, she knows the boundaries. I expect you to respect our marriage," Mark said firmly. "Mark, I respect you and your marriage," Jake said, still smirking. "There might even be a promotion for you that night." Mark talked to Allison. "Did you talk to Jake today?" "Yes, he mentioned the EA position." She replied, "What do you think?" Mark asked. "It means travel and late hours, but also a nice raise. We could use the money for when we have kids," Allison said. "Are you concerned about anything?" Mark asked. "I'm aware of the rumors, but do you trust me?" she asked. "Of course I trust you, but I don't trust him," he replied. "What did you tell him?" Mark asked. "I said you're a joy to be around and that we're happily married," she said. "Good. I think I'll take the job," Allison replied. They went to bed and made love before falling asleep, and he was working late 3 nights a week. Mark supported her and saw nothing unprofessional about it. Then, over 3 months ago, Alan had a massive stroke and died that night. The company was devastated and everyone attended his funeral. Jake expected to become CEO, but the board appointed David Matt as interim CEO, considering Jake to be inexperienced. Jake was determined to prove him wrong. He was overworking Allison, making her travel and work late, and straining their marriage, their bed, and their lives. Their relationship and their wardrobe became more strained, and she grew demanding and short-tempered. On a Sunday, Mark spoke to Allison after she'd been to New York. He said, "We need to talk about what she said about us. Jake's schedule is all over the place, and we need time off to reconnect. I'm sorry, Jake's busy and things are crazy. Tell Jake you're taking a week's vacation. We need this." After a pause, she said, "You're right. I'll talk to him tomorrow." The next day, Allison came home happier. Jake agreed that we could take next week off if we attended a party at his place on Friday night. What kind of party? Just a small get-together with friends. Mark felt uneasy but agreed, provided that Allison came home early the rest of the week. "Do you know any of these people?" "I've met some," Allison said. "Mostly college friends of Jake's. A couple of them are clients, but I'm not sure who else I see." Mark said, "All right, but come home at a normal hour this week." "I think so. We have the Henderson account dinner meeting on Wednesday, though." Mark knew the Henderson account was a priority since Alan's stroke. She smiled, wrapping her arms around him. Jake came to Mark's office the next afternoon, grinning. "What can I do for you, Jake?" "Ally says you're on for Friday night. I'm free as long as she gets home on time the rest of the week and we get next week off. We have the Henderson dinner on Wednesday." "What's the party like?" He asked who would be there. "It's just a casual get-together with a few college buddies and a client." "It'll be casual. Just bring Ally." Mark nodded. He added, "By the way, Mark, Ally is great at her job. I appreciate you letting her do it without giving her a hard time. I'd be lost without her." Mark didn't know how to respond. He was glad you're satisfied with her work. "There's one thing, though." Jake asked, "Do you call her Ally to her face?" "Of course," Mark replied. "Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious," Jake said. That night, he asked Allison, "Do you let Jake call you Ally?" "I never let him HEK my boss," she said. "He can call me whatever he wants." Mark dropped it, but it bothered him. The week went well, except for Wednesday night, when she was home on time. They made love often on Friday. That night, Mark got ready in casual clothes and watched Allison get ready. Her dress was new and much shorter than usual, showing a lot of skin. She wore a strip he hadn't seen before and no bra. The dress had slits up the sides, exposing a lot of skin with an open back. He could see her bosom swell against the material. "You look amazing. Maybe we should stay." When she got home, she smiled. "Where did you get that dress?" she asked. "It doesn't look casual." "I got it in New York," Jake told her. "I asked you to wear it tonight. Be careful, though. Someone might get the wrong idea." "I don't think so," she replied. "Everyone knows their boundaries." "They better." Jake hugged her and tried to kiss her, but she waved him off. "I don't want to mess up my makeup." They drove to Jake's townhouse in a posh part of town. When Jake opened the door, Mark smelled marijuana and felt uneasy. There were 3 young men there, John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins, who worked for Henderson. "Guys, this is Mark Hurley," Jake said with a grin. "Mark, meet John, George, and Alan," he said. Mark shook hands and wondered why. Jake called him the man of the hour and didn't introduce Allison. "Ally, you look great in that dress." The men nodded appreciatively as Allison modeled the dress. Mark didn't like Jake's reaction. "Let me get you drinks, Ally. White wine." "That's fine, I don't drink much." Mark actually had a high booze tolerance but quit drinking years ago. Jake returned with drinks. Allison took a big sip while Mark took small sips, staying sober. Jake invited everyone to the living room. Mark noticed that Allison was sitting on a love seat, so he quickly sat next to her. Mark took a seat opposite them, watching closely. "Sorry, old buddy." "It's a habit," Jake said. "No problem," Mark replied. Glancing at his wife, they chatted until Jake asked, "My dad said you were in the Marines." "Yes, 5 years before medical discharge." Mark answered. "John asked if you ever see combat and eliminate anyone." Mark nodded, and both Allison and John looked surprised. "Mark never told me that. It's not something I like to talk about." George pulled out a bag of marijuana and rolled a joint and passed it around. Mark declined. "Thanks, but no, I like to keep a clear head." Jake insisted. "Lighten up." "Mark, it's a party. You go ahead. I'd rather stay sober. Your loss. Besides, you can stay here if you get too messed up. You're off next week anyway." He turned to Allison, rifle Allison, smile and nod. She did so, and Jake blew smoke into her mouth. She inhaled, coughing slightly. "Inhale, coughing slightly, that's good stuff," she said. Mark was stunned, not recognizing this side of her. Jake handed the joint back to George. He said, pointing at Mark, that he is the best business analyst in the company. "He saved us millions and brought me this lovely assistant." Allison smiled at Jake, and Mark noticed it was more than just a polite she smiled at him, hanging on his every word. Jake thought of her as his work wife. Jake patted Allison's bare thigh. Mark thought he saw Jake's hand inch under her dress before pulling back. Jake said he'd be lost without her. Mark said he would be too. Mark needed to use the restroom. He said so, looking down. Mark went to the restroom. He went to the first door on the left. Jake went to the bathroom, and Mark locked the door and looked in the mirror, wondering if Allison was cheating on him with Jake. He remembered Alan's advice about paying attention to details. Mark noticed several worrying signs: Allison's revealing dress, her interaction with Jake, her sudden pill use, and Jake calling her his work wife. He decided he needed proof. He discreetly started recording on his phone and returned to the room. Mark saw Allison sit up quickly with white powder on her nose. The others had it too. Mark sipped his drink and saw undissolved powder at the bottom. He felt suddenly tired. "Are you okay, Allison?" she asked Jake. The men stood up, with Allison grabbing Jake's arm. Mark tried to stand but couldn't. "Mark, Jake," he said, as the men put his feet up. Allison removed his shoes, and Mark noticed her strip on the love seat. She covered him with an afghan. "I'm sorry," she said. "I really do love you," she whispered, kissing his forehead. He fell into a deep sleep when he woke. The house was dark and silent except for snoring upstairs. He realized he'd been out for over 3 hours. He stopped the video recording and crept upstairs in the master suite. He saw Allison unclothed on Jake's bed with one leg was over him, and one of the 3 men was also dressed next to her. The other 2 were asleep, one on a couch and the other in a recliner. Mark quietly returned downstairs. He needed to find out what they'd given him, so he rummaged through Jake's kitchen and found a Tupperware container. He poured the drink into it and sealed it back in the front room. He poured it into a Tupperware container and sealed it back up in the front room. He took Allison's keychain from her purse and found an unfamiliar key, which he pocketed. He then grabbed Allison's phone, intending to check it later. He placed his wedding ring on her purse so she'd see it and put on his shoes. He crept to the door and looked around to see if he looked like he belonged. He thought it was a security system, but he didn't see one. The unfamiliar key fit the door perfectly, so he locked it behind him and left quietly, not turning on his car lights until he was on the street. He drove to a convenience store and called his old friend R.K. Evans, who ran a private investigative firm. "Hello, R.K. "Hey R.K., it's Mark. Sorry to call so late, but I need your help." "What's up, Mark? You need bail or something?" "Not quite. Can you be at my place in 20 minutes? "Yeah, sure, I'll be there." "Everything's all right." "I'd rather not talk about it over the phone." "Gotcha. See you in 20 minutes. "Thanks, buddy. Semper Fiura," R.K. replied. Mark bought a 12-pack of beer. He grabbed a pack of beer and cigarettes. He hadn't smoked since leaving the service, but needed something to calm him at home. He put the beer in the fridge, lit a cigarette, and sat on the couch using a candy dish for an ashtray. RK arrived and Mark offered him a beer. He explained the night's events. RK was pretty shocked. Mark handed him the container with the dosed wine. "Can you get this analyzed?" RK asked. "I'll get the results on Monday or Tuesday," Mark replied. "I need everything. Jake, Marcus, John Whitehead, George Franklin, and Alan Jenkins. Jenkins works for Henderson Manufacturing. Here's a video of them." "Got it." RK said, "Do you want surveillance inside Jake's place and yours?" "Yeah, if you can. I have a key." "I didn't see a security system." RK took the key. "No problem. How'd you get this?" "I took it from Allison's keychain." RK nodded. "You probably can't use any video from inside his place as evidence. I figured this is personal." "I understand." "Mark. I gave him the extra key to his house and the security system code so I can set up the equipment now." RK offered to return the key, high-def cameras, audio, and even record landline calls. Mark said, "How much will this cost?" "Don't worry about it. You saved my skin in the Middle East. This is the least I can do." "Thanks, old friend. At least let me cover your costs." "All right," RK said. "Let's go through the video for clues." Mark started the video from the beginning. "Stop right there," RK said. They paused the video and watched as the camera captured Allison finishing a line of white powder on the coffee table. Mark stopped the video. "I saw her just as she sat up. That definitely looks like powder on the table." "Yes, it does," RK replied. "Interesting. Have you ever known Allison to use pills?" Mark shook his head. "Never. Let's see what else is on here." Mark resumed the video, and they watched as he sat on the couch across from Allison. The video showed something on the love seat. RK asked Mark to take a closer look. It was Allison's strip. He'd seen it before he passed out, but thought he was imagining it. She must have taken it off after he went to the bathroom. He resumed the video and they saw what happened to Mark. The camera showed him lying down with the others looking down at him. They heard Allison ask if he was okay and Jake tell him to take a nap. Allison then leaned over and whispered in his ear, "You sure?" George asked, "Do you want to tie him up and make him watch us?" Allison replied, "This is enough for one night. We have all week. We can always step things up if he doesn't go along." Jake said, "You know John swings both ways. Maybe he could show Mark the other side." Allison joined in, "I'd like to see that." John asked, "You'd let me screw your husband?" Allison replied, "Sure, why not?" John said, "Maybe if you're nice, you can get him to do more." They all laughed again. John said, "I've never done a Marine before." Mark fought the urge to throw his phone. "Seriously, Jake, is he going to be okay? You didn't give him too much, did you?" Allison asked. "Nah, he'll be fine." Jake said, "HEK, sleep for about 12 hours and wake up with a headache. He'll think he drank too much tomorrow. I'll introduce him to the really hard stuff by next week. Old Mark will be a powder user. Maybe I'll even have to get him to work the street for me. It's a shame old Dad isn't around to see his golden boy fall." "Is that why you hate him?" Allison asked. "That's all I heard about in college." Jake said, "How Mark went to school while serving and fighting for America. How he worked hard while defending the country. Sometimes I thought Dad would rather have Mark as a son than me. Well, guess what, Dad? I'm Mark's boss now. I have Mark's woman. By next week your golden boy will be a powder user." They all Jake asked, "Are you laughing with me, boys?" They all said yes. "What about you, Ally? Are you with me? If not, you'll be on the street with him." "I'm with you, sweetie," Allison replied. I've grown to love this too much to walk away. They assumed she was referring to Jake's manhood. All right then, Jake said. Let's go upstairs and start the real party. Goody, Allison said, heading upstairs. Make me airtight. The video recorded sounds of lovemaking from the bedroom. He paused the video and put his head in his hands. RK placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. This is going to be tough, but we'll get you through it. Mark nodded, thanks. What will you do? I'm divorcing her, no doubt about it. I understand. Why don't you get away for a few days? Let me handle this. What are you planning? It's best you don't know. We just witnessed a criminal conspiracy. Someone will go to jail, but we need you safe. I can help, Mark insisted. He shook his head. You're in danger. Remember Gunny Johnson? He's in Vegas now. He owes me favors and can set you up with a place, okay? Let me wire the place for audio and video first. Mark said, stay focused. Understand? Yes, thanks, RK said. You're a good friend. You're a good friend too, Mark replied. I'm going to the porch with a beer while you wire the rooms and tap the phone. You're setting up the audio and video to be stored on a cloud server, right? I'll need the access details. I've got them, RK said. I'll give you the link. I'll call Gunny tomorrow and let you know about the system switch. Don't do anything stupid. I understand. Good luck, my friend. I'll be in touch. Thanks again for everything. Mark said after RK left. Mark turned on his computer and checked his bank accounts. He still had an account in his name from before the marriage. He had been depositing 10% of his earnings originally meant as a surprise for Allison. He transferred half of their joint account. He transferred the money into this old account and paid off and canceled their joint credit cards. He still had a personal credit card from his original account. He packed clothes for a few days and loaded the suitcases into his car. Inside the house, his eyes fell on their wedding portrait over the fireplace. He was filled with rage at her betrayal. He shredded the portrait with a hunting knife and tossed all photos of Allison into the fireplace. He also added her wedding dress, but decided against it. He decided to wait before burning everything, wanting her to witness it. He grabbed a beer and emailed the incriminating video to himself, then verified it on his laptop. He wrote a letter to each board member and David, the interim CEO, detailing what had transpired. He reminded the board about the morals clause in Jake's employment agreement and the potential lawsuits and scandals his actions could cause. He expressed his respect for Alan and hoped the board would act. He was pleased with his letter, so he attached the video and emailed it to David and the board. He said he'd be on vacation but reachable by email or phone. He expected a response by Tuesday and planned to be away by then. He sat back, lit a cigarette, and watched as the heat burned Allison's face in the photo. He felt a sense of grim satisfaction. He unlocked her phone using the code he'd set up for her. He went through her texts and became even more furious. Allison and Jake had been sleeping together for at least 6 months, but in the last 3, she had started openly disrespecting him. He found numerous pictures of Jake undressed, Jake and Allison kissing and dancing in a nightclub, likely in New York, and explicit photos of Allison with multiple men. There were videos, too, showing Allison having sex with Jake and others, including the 3 men from the party. He realized this was what she had been up to. He copied everything he could find on her phone and emailed it to himself. By then he had downed 6 beers and smoked half a pack of cigarettes, using her face in the photos as an ashtray. He saw the sunrise and knew Allison would wake soon, so he grabbed his loaded rifle, locked the door and lay on the couch trying to get some sleep. Allison woke at 8:30, checked the clock on Jake's nightstand, and went to the bathroom to freshen up. Jake and the others were awake by the time she came out. Jake threw on a robe and looked at her. He suggested going downstairs to start breakfast. He asked Mark if he wanted coffee. She said, throwing on a robe and padding downstairs. She started a pot of coffee and went to wake Mark in the living room, but he wasn't there. She tossed the Afghan aside and saw that his shoes were gone. She checked the bathroom, but he wasn't there. She saw that the car was gone and his ring was missing. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, looking in her purse. Jake was standing in the bedroom. "What's wrong?" "He's gone." "What do you mean?" "He must have woken up and left. He took the car and left his ring. Call him and get him to come back." "Okay," she said as she ran downstairs. She put Mark's ring in her purse. She looked in her purse for her phone but couldn't find it. Jake was downstairs. "My phone is gone." "Use the house phone." "You don't understand. It's full of texts, pictures, and videos you sent. If he has it, he's seen them. Don't worry. Just get him over here. We'll handle it." Allison called Mark. Allison picked up the house phone and dialed Mark's cell. "Hello, Mark," answered Mark, sounding groggy. "Mark, you weren't here when I got up and I was worried. Are you all right? What do you care? Sweetheart, I need you to come pick me up at Jake's house. Can you do that, please?" Mark laughed. "Screw you. I may have been clueless yesterday, but not anymore. You don't get to call. Mark, please don't be angry. I do love you, but you don't get to call me sweetheart or honey ever again. We need to talk, but I'm not coming over there if you want to talk. Walk or call. I think an Uber is the best way to discuss how to split everything up." "What do you mean split everything up?" "That's what happens in a divorce." "I don't want a divorce. Can't we work this out?" I didn't want to be dazed and confused either. "Get home if you want to talk, but don't let Jake or anyone else come here. If anyone else comes here, I'm armed and I'll blow their heads off if they step foot in my house. I'll call an Uber and bring cash or your ATM card." "Why?" "Because your credit card doesn't work anymore." "Why doesn't it work?" "I canceled it last night." "Oh," she said quietly by the. "I don't know where my phone is." "It's on the coffee table. I've got an interesting collection of pictures and videos. I can see what you've been doing these last 3 months. They'll help my divorce case." "Mark, I'm really sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Don't make excuses. If you want to talk, do it now and come alone." "I'll be there, Mark." She ended the call, looking at Jake. Jake asked, "Are you coming?" "No, I have to go there to talk to him." "All right, we'll take you." She shook her head no. "He's armed. If any of you show up, he'd get rid of you." I've never heard him so angry. Jake thought for a moment, then went to his study. He came back with a syringe. "Here's the plan. Put this in your purse, call an Uber, and we'll follow you to your place when you get a chance. Inject this into his arm, then call me. We'll pick him up. And put him in my trunk." "What is it?" "It's a special concoction, some dope, smack, and something to knock him out. It works fast and won't hurt him. Just stick him with it and call me when he's out." "Got it." He handed her the syringe and she put it in her purse. "Okay. Just promise you. It'll be fine, it'll be quick, we'll do our best, right boys," he said, looking at the 3 men who laughed. "Call for your ride." She arranged an Uber to pick her up in 30 minutes and went upstairs to finish getting ready. When the driver arrived, she left Jake and his friends, who followed, parking a block away. Mark didn't notice the white van parked across the street a few minutes after speaking to Allison. His phone rang and it was RK. "What's up?" Mark asked. RK said a parabolic microphone picked it up. "Your wife is getting an Uber and her friends are following. They're planning to drug you and kidnap you. It's in her purse. She'll use it when she can. My boys will follow Jake and his crew." "Damn," Mark said. "Yeah," RK said. "Be careful. I'll text you when they leave. Turn on the surveillance gear when she gets there and I'll monitor it." I'm just down the street. I'll call the cops when needed. Be ready, okay? Thanks. About half an hour later, Mark got the text on the move showtime. Mark muttered he had about 20 minutes before he arrived and stashed the rifle where Allison wouldn't find it easily, then turned on the surveillance gear in the kitchen. He grabbed a Ziploc bag for the syringe and a tissue. He watched from the window and saw the Uber pull up and Allison nervously exit the car, clutching her purse. He turned on the fireplace, setting the photos and her dress alight. When she walked in, she grimaced at the cigarette smoke, her eyes widening at the sight of the burning portrait and her wedding dress. You're burning my wedding dress, our pictures. Mark, why are you doing this? Her face, but Mark was unmoved. I wanted you to see what your actions have done to us. She glanced at the beer bottles and cigarette butts in her candy dish. I thought you had a low booze tolerance and I never knew you smoked. I quit smoking, and as for drinking, I get mean when drunk. I once liquidated a man. I chose not to drink again, just like you chose to become Jake's witch. Oh my God, Mark, what have I done? You tell me what happened to you. You used to be so sweet and kind. Since when have you snorted cocaine? Who are these men you've been with? She asked. Jake made me great. Your actions could ruin Marcus Financial. How long have you planned to pill me and assault me? Was that your idea or Jake's? She looked shocked. I never. Mark cut her off. Shut up, he said, pulling out his phone. He played the video of her and her accomplices. Her accomplices were talking over him. She turned white as she heard her own words. How did you get that? It doesn't matter, Mark said. What's important is that David and the board members now have this video. The police will have it too. We're getting divorced, and if I have my way, you're going to be in prison for a long time. I just want to know why you don't understand. It's a long story. Maybe you can tell me one day when I'm not so inclined to strangle you. He picked up the syringe with a tissue. Is this what you plan to do to me? Do you even know what it is? He asked sarcastically. You were going to inject me without knowing what it could do. You're one sick woman. She nodded yes. So if Jake told you to do this, if you were in my shoes, you'd do the same. You were supposed to inject me, then call him to come and kidnap me. She was pretty ashamed, so she nodded. Right, let's do this. Call Jake, put it on speaker and tell him you did it. I'll take it from there. Don't let him know I'm. Right, you want me to set him up? Yes, any questions? She shook her head. I understand. Great, just do it and no tricks. Mark watched as she called and put the phone on speaker. Jake, it's me, Ally. It's done. He's out. Good girl. We'll be right there. She ended the call and looked at Mark. He'll eliminate me when he sees you're not out. Too bad. Remember, no signals otherwise I might eliminate you myself. Mark sat in a recliner and waited. When he saw Jake and his three buddies through the window, he pretended to be asleep but kept his eyes slightly open. Jake walked in and looked around. At the mess, he started toward Mark. You did good, Jake told Allison. Now we're going to put him in the trunk. As Jake reached for Mark, he opened his eyes and smashed Jake in the throat before Jake could react. Mark kicked him hard in the lap. The other three men tried to help, but Jake's team Jake was detained and fell to his knees, moaning in pain. Mark slipped behind him, pulled out his hunting knife and grabbed Jake's hair, positioning the knife at his throat. Make your peace with God, Mark growled. I'm going to cut your head off. Jake pissed his pants in fear, and Allison recoiled. In horror, Mark began pressing the knife against Jake's throat. RK shouted, Sergeant, don't do it. Drop the knife. The police are on their way. He deserves to die. Mark exclaimed. RK knelt in front of Jake. Yes, he does, but not by your hand. If you eliminate. If you go ahead and do it, you'll end up in prison. Let the authorities handle it, please, as a friend. Put the knife down. He'll pay for what he's done. Mark looked at RK, feeling Jake trembling in fear. Slowly, he pulled the knife away and stood up. Ark turned Jake over, zip-tied his hands, and told Allison to lie face down as he secured her hands. She watched as he secured her hands, and hot tears fell from her eyes as she saw a picture of her and Mark burn in the fireplace. Mark sat on the couch watching RK secure both Allison and Jake. The other three were secured in the front yard by RK's men. The police sirens grew louder as the police cruisers pulled up outside the house. Your phone, RK said. I'll talk to the police before they come inside. Mark handed him the phone as RK left. Jake turned to face Mark. His smirk was gone. My father always loved you more than me, Jake said. Not true, Mark replied. Jake hoped he'd mature enough to step into his shoes one day. Would you really have cut my head off? I never know, Mark replied. But I promise you, where you're going, you'll meet people who won't hesitate like I did. And if you come after me again, I won't hesitate either. He rested his head back in silence. 3 large police officers entered, surveyed the scene, and read Jake and Allison their Miranda rights before escorting them to the cruisers. One officer picked up the syringe in the plastic bag from the coffee table. Is this what they plan to use on you? He asked. Yes, Mark confirmed. The officer took Mark's full statement and said, You were lucky you know that. No, my fellow Marine had my back. The officer smiled and nodded. Sergeant Fay said, Good work, Mark. He shook Mark's hand. Thanks, Mark responded. After the police left, RK joined Mark on the couch. The couch got another one of those. He asked, pointing at the beer bottles. I think I have 1 or 2 left, he said. It's kind of early for this, don't you think? After this, no, said Mark, handing him a cold bottle. How are you holding up? Okay. It feels like Iraq. I need to decompress. I spoke to Gunny and he'll take care of everything if you want to hang out in Vegas for a few days. Here's his number. I might do that, but I've got some things to handle here first. RK handed Mark 2 cards, Gunny's number and a divorce lawyer, Michelle Hawkins, who hates cheaters and expects you at 8 midnight. On Monday, Mark said thanks for everything. Just do or die, RK said. I will, Mark replied after finishing their beers. You have some cleaning to do. I'll be by later to get the surveillance gear, RK said. RK left and Mark started cleaning the house that afternoon. Mark received a call from David Matt. This is David Matt, he said. When Mark answered, he said, Yes, Mr. Matt, what can I do for you? Call me David, he replied. I got your email and saw the video, as did the board. We agree with your letter, which was impressive. Thank you, David. You're welcome. We also agreed to terminate both Allison and Jake's employment immediately, given that they're in custody. I'm heading to the county jail to handle it personally. What about you? Mark asked, What's that? County jail to handle it personally? There's something else. What is it? We think you should take a few days to unwind. Do you have somewhere to go? A friend offered to look after me in Vegas. I have a divorce lawyer appointment on Monday, then I'll head out. Vegas sounds perfect. Enjoy your trip, Mark. We'll see you next week. From Monday, thanks, David. One more thing, we all agreed you'd be the best person for Jake's job. Mark asked, Yes, we're impressed with how you handled this, and the board values your work. There'll be a salary increase and other benefits. You deserve it. Thanks, David. Don't thank me yet. First, you'll oversee it. We're going to have an external audit of everything Jake handled. The auditors will report to you and you'll report to me. I think that's a good idea. I've learned that Jake had Allison engage in sexual intercourse with some clients. Well, I'll leave that to you. Have a good trip and we'll see you a week from Monday. See you then, David. Thanks after the call. Mark finished cleaning the house and mowed the yard. He called Gunny Johnson and they caught up. So you want to come out for a few days and have some fun? Gunny asked. Yeah, sure, all right, come on out. He'll set you up with a nice room and show you the ropes, but remember, this is Las Vegas, not Bangkok. They laughed. I'll remember, Gunny said. Mark said, see you Monday evening. See you, Mark, Gunny replied. Mark was pretty tired the next day, so he went to bed early. He got up and took all of Allison's stuff to the garage to get rid of it. He was planning to wait until he knew she was going to prison the next morning to take it to Goodwill. He got to Michelle Hawkins's office at 8, it's 10 p.m. She looked over his evidence and paperwork, making notes as he spoke. She explained California's divorce laws, noting that everything is generally divided equally since they had no children and the house was his before marriage. He'd likely keep the house while Allison would get the remaining half of their bank accounts. She said that his wife's infidelity couldn't be brought up in the divorce. The divorce might affect the judge's decision, but the criminal charges might influence it too. She also mentioned that he probably wouldn't have to pay support while she was incarcerated, though that could change upon her release. I'll make this as painless as possible. Michelle assured him, I'll draw the papers and have them served if she signs. I'll present them to the judge, and it'll be a 6-month wait. Mark agreed and gave her a retainer before heading home. He stopped by the county jail to tell Allison he was filing for divorce. Sitting at a table, he watched as she was brought out looking tired in an orange jumpsuit. They picked up the handsets to communicate through the plexiglass shield. Hello, Allison. Hello, Mark. I wanted to let you know I'm filing for divorce. I saw an attorney today. I figured you would. To be honest, what happened? She asked. Jake seemed like any other executive after Alan died. But then he got angry. He wasn't promoted and blamed you. He thought his father set things up for you. That's crazy. Mark said Alan wanted Jake to become CEO one day. I know, she said. We went to New York that weekend at a club with clients dancing and drinking. I flirted a bit, but I didn't think I was out of line. Next thing I know, I felt really good and ended up in bed with 2 guys. Jake joined in. Later on, she paused. The next morning, I felt guilty. Jake showed me pictures and videos he'd taken and said I had to do whatever he wanted or he'd show you. He was blackmailing you, Mark said, and he'd probably also dazed you. He did. He admitted it later. They found pills at his place. His place, did he get you on powder, dope, and other stuff? How many clients did you sleep with? She shrugged. I don't know, several. Jake set it all up. Whenever we traveled, Mark shook his head from the video. It seemed like you enjoyed dazing me, turning me into a she said she was a powder user for Jake, which was really about the Henderson project. She shook her head no, saying they were planning Friday's party, so it was all planned in advance. Allison nodded yes and said, I'm sorry, Mark. That's the first thing you've said that I agree with. Can you forgive me? Not just no, but hell no. You cheated on me with that idiot and who knows how many others. Then you plotted to pill and assault me. You're out of your mind. Don't even ask if we can be friends. I understand, Mark. I hope it was worth it. Goodbye, Allison. He hung up as tears fell. He went home, packed his bags, and headed for Vegas. He met up with Gunny Johnson and they had dinner together. Gunny then showed him around, gave him some tips on gambling, and took him to his room. Inside, a lovely young brunette sat on the bed. She stood up as they entered. Mark, this is Candy, Gunny said. She'll be your tour guide while you're here. Gunny, this isn't necessary, Mark said. Son, this is exactly what you need after what your wife put you through. Relax, have a good time, and remember what happens here stays here. They usually laughed. I've got to go, but I hope you two have fun. Before he left, Mark turned to Candy and asked, Are you an escort? Not anymore, Candy replied. Thanks to Gunny, I'm out of a bad situation, I'm clean, I'm going to school, and I'm working a real job. He then told me about her and asked if I'd spend time with her. If you want, I'll leave you alone. No problem. Mark said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a bother. I could use some company, and you're a lovely woman. Would you like to go out for a drink? That sounds nice, she replied, smiling. They went to the club and had a few drinks. They had a few drinks and danced for a few hours. She helped him forget his troubles. He woke up to find her beside him. They showered together and got dressed. I have classes today, but I can meet you back here tonight if you want. She said, sounds like a plan. He said, they kissed before she left, and he went downstairs for breakfast. Then he headed to the casino to try his luck, following Gunn's advice. He walked away with about $300. He spent it on dinner, drinks, and a show with Candy that night. Once again, she rocked his world. The rest of the week was the same. Things went pretty much the same way, and by Friday he was ready to go home and move on with his life. Candy was sad to see him leave, but understood. She gave him her phone number and email address in case he wanted to reach out again. He liked her, but doubted it would turn into a full relationship. She was much younger and had her whole life ahead of her. Still, he thought, who knows? He drove home with a smile on his face, memories of Candy filling his mind. When he got home, he thought about Candy and smiled. He caught up on news about Allison and her group. The judge ordered them held without bail after reviewing the evidence from the prosecutor. He also received confirmation from Michelle that Allison had been served divorce papers. According to Michelle, Allison signed them right away and they were filed with the court in 6 months. The following Monday, he went to work and found all his things moved into Jake's old office. Everyone welcomed him back and wished him well in his new position. He settled in and met the external auditors. He got them situated and met his new assistant, Marcia Bowden. He'd known her since she started with the company a few years ago and liked her. She was married and had received high praise from her previous supervisors. She also knew about his situation and was careful not to mention it. The audit uncovered several irregularities in Jake's paperwork. For instance, he had fudged his expense account on trips he and Allison had taken. Then the auditors found that Jake had mismanaged some client accounts. This was reported to the SEC. Jake was soon facing federal charges. Mark and David spent the next few months cleaning up the mess Jake had left behind. Thankfully, they didn't lose any clients thanks to their quick response, but they had several uncomfortable conversations with other executives who were understandably upset. Meanwhile, Mark stayed in touch with Candy, mostly through emails. Eventually, she told him she had met someone at school and they were serious. Someone at school and they were serious. He wasn't surprised and wished her well at the same time. Allison and Jake's trials dragged on with more charges and motions. Mark found himself testifying against his wife and her accomplices, even though her defense team tried to discourage him, saying he wasn't required to testify against his wife. I may not be required to, but I want to, he told them. Her lawyer said that in a few weeks she wouldn't be his wife anymore. The jury was surprised by his testimony, and even more so when the video Mark took on Friday night was played for them. Finally, the day came for the jury to announce their verdicts. Mark and David sat in the courtroom watching as Allison, Jake, and the other 3 men were brought in. None of them could meet Mark's gaze. The trial had become a media circus. The judge called the court back into session and asked the jury if they'd reached a decision. The foreman stood and confirmed that they had. Everyone held their breath as the judge read through the charges, which included conspiracy to kidnap and assault. Jake faced additional charges related to the pills found in his townhouse and the lewd photos and videos he had. With the other women, they were all found guilty on every charge. The judge set the date for sentencing and the 5 convicted conspirators were led out of the courtroom. Mark and David walked out, brushing past the crowd of reporters pushing cameras in their faces. About 10 days later, the sentencing took place. The judge made it clear he was thoroughly disgusted with all 5 of them. Basically, they got the maximum sentence. Jake's 3 friends got the shortest sentences, but still had to serve 20 years. Allison got 25 years to life, and Jake got 50 years. He'll also face federal charges from the SEC, which will be handled in federal court. Allison cried as she was led out of the courtroom, while Jake looked down in shame. Jake was released from prison about 6 months later, but he was found decapitated in the shower. It seems he angered the wrong people who didn't like his smug attitude. A month after the sentencing, Mark was in his office going over some paperwork when Marcia buzzed him on the intercom. "Mr. Hurley, there's a Kristen Marcus here to see you." Mark's attention was caught by the last name. "Send her in." The door opened and Mark saw an attractive blonde enter his office. Her hair fell below her shoulders and she wore a skirt that fell just below her knees. She smiled as she approached, extending her hand. "It's great to finally meet you, Mr. Hurley." He shook her hand and invited her to sit. "Please call me Mark. Would you like something to drink?" "Coffee, tea, coffee would be wonderful." "Please, and call me Kristen." Mark asked Mara to get each a cup of coffee and sat down as his assistant left the office. "Marcus," Mark said, looking at her, "are you related to Alan? His daughter, perhaps?" She smiled and shook her head. "No, I'm his niece." "I see. I'm surprised we haven't met before. I thought I knew everyone in Alan's family. I've been quite busy. I was in France when Uncle Alan he died and couldn't make it back for his funeral, so what can I do for you? I just wanted to meet the man who took my cousin down. I take it there's no love lost between you." She shook her head no. "No," she said quietly. "I'm just glad he's finally paying for his crimes. I'm really sorry for what he did to you. From what I know, you didn't deserve any of it. And I'm sorry. I've heard a lot about you from my uncle, so I see you're a doctor. Are you a medical doctor?" "No, I have a PhD in business and economics. I teach at UCLA. My uncle and I shared many interests, but I'm more focused on academics." He didn't want the conversation to end. To be honest, he was interested in this woman. "Listen, Kristen, I'd love to continue this discussion over dinner. That is, if you don't mind being seen in public with a lowly MBA." She smiled, and her eyes sparkled. "There's nothing lowly about being an MBA. I'd love to be seen with you in public. Dinner sounds great. How about Red Lobster tonight at 7:00? She gave him a card with her number and address on it. "Red Lobster it is," Mark said, taking the card from her. "I'll pick you up at 6:30 if that works. I'll see you then, Mark." "It's been great meeting you," she said before walking out that evening. Kristen was shocked but not surprised. "I'm so sorry, you deserve much better." Mark and Kristen dated for several months and fell in love. She nearly tackled him to the floor, smothering him with kisses when he asked her to marry him. "I take it that's a yes?" Mark asked when she finally let him breathe. "No, that's a hell yes," she said. "Now carry me to bed and ravish me properly." "Yes, ma'am," Mark said, carrying his bride-to-be upstairs. He thought things were looking good.